Dawn in Seoul tinged the horizon with golden hues, reflecting off the mirrored buildings, as if each ray of light sought to illuminate secrets hidden among the heights of power. At the top of the Hanul Corporation, the business elite gathered around a glass table, debating million-dollar contracts with the coolness of those who have turned ambition into routine. Amid the neat ties and expensive perfumes, one figure went unnoticed. The woman in the blue uniform cleaning the floor, hunched over in silence, almost invisible to everyone. Her name tag read Yun So Ra, but that woman's real name could never be uttered there, not without causing an earthquake. Behind the disguise lived Han Ji-won, the true heir to the corporation, betrayed, erased, and presumed dead after a silent coup within her own family. Her simple shoes contrasted with the gleam of the marble tables she herself had installed when she still ruled that empire. Now, every step she took was a calculation, every look a reminder of all that had been taken from her. She no longer sought mercy or immediate revenge. She awaited the exact moment when fate, patient and implacable, would turn in her favor. As she mopped the living room floor, she listened to the directors talk about profits and power, unaware that the real danger was kneeling before them. Ji-won looked up and smiled discreetly. After all, what could happen when the woman everyone thought invisible decided to be seen again? If this story has you curious to see what comes next, subscribe now and leave a like, because the woman they ignored is about to change everything. Before becoming invisible behind walls she herself helped build, Han Ji-won had been the beating heart of the Hanul Group. The only daughter of Han Tae-suk, a visionary and respected businessman, she had grown up listening to the sound of meetings in her father's office and the advice he always repeated. Power only has value when it is used to protect, not to dominate. Ji-won believed this with every fiber of her being. When she met Kang Min-ho, an intelligent and ambitious young executive, believed she had found someone who shared her philosophy. He was the kind of man who could charm an entire room with his firm voice and confident gaze. And in her eyes, he seemed sincere. Their wedding was an event celebrated by all of Seoul's elite. Magazines portrayed the couple as symbols of success, the kindly heiress and the financial genius. For a time, their union truly seemed perfect. Together, they restructured departments, increased investments, and transformed the company into a modern empire. Ji-won admired her husband's talent, and Min-ho, in turn, knew how to use the right words to make her trust him more and more. But love, when blind, doesn't notice the subtle cracks that form beneath the surface. The first shadow appeared with her father's sudden death. The news came on a rainy night, along with rumors that the heart attack had been precipitated by discussions about changes in shareholder control. Ji-won plunged into grief, and Min-ho took advantage of the silent mourning to consolidate his power. Within months, the discovered will named him interim president, until she was emotionally ready to resume. But the document, which seemed like a gesture of protection, was the first step in a carefully planned betrayal. When Ji-won tried to question him, the advisors, once loyal to her father, were already at the new leader's side. One by one, her former allies fell away. The empire she helped build crumbled before her eyes, and the man she trusted became unrecognizable. She remembered the day she tried to enter Hanul headquarters and was stopped by security, following her husband's direct orders. "Do I no longer belong?" she asked with a trembling voice. Min-ho merely watched her from above, with coldness disguised as reason. "You need to rest, Ji-won. The company needs stability now." Those words echoed like a sentence. That night, she packed her few belongings and left Seoul without looking back. She carried in her heart the weight of a love turned into a weapon and the silent oath of an inevitable return. Because deep down, something in her knew that fate doesn't close doors, It just waits for the right moment to open them again. And when the clock of time began to turn in her favor, the silence that felt like defeat would become the most dangerous sound Minho would ever hear. 5 years had passed. Since that night, Han Ji-won left. To the world, she had vanished, gone without a trace, as if the wind had erased her name. But in truth, Ji-won never stopped watching. From afar, she followed every move of the Hanoul Corporation, every contract announced, every arrogant smile plastered across the newspapers. And when time finally showed her that Kang Min-ho's empire was beginning to falter, she knew her moment had come. On a cold morning, a woman in a blue uniform stepped off the subway and walked between the skyscrapers of Seoul with light, steady steps. The name tag hanging on her chest bore another name, Yoon So-ra, and with it, a new identity. No one would recognize in the silent employee the woman who once commanded that building. Ji-won observed everything calmly, like a general surveying the battlefield before war. Each hallway brought back memories of a life that had been ripped away. Each indifferent glance from an employee was like living proof that the world had forgotten who she was. During lunch, she watched from afar as her husband, now CEO, got out of his luxury car accompanied by a woman in an expensive dress and the smile of someone who believed she had conquered destiny. Seo Hye-jin, Minho's new partner, was the epitome of arrogance and status quo. Her hands rested on his arm like someone holding a trophy. Ji-won looked away, not out of weakness but out of strategy. Because there, amidst the laughter and cameras, no one suspected that the cleaning lady was the true heir to the group. In the days that followed, Ji-won observed and learned. She learned the rhythm of the floors, the names of the assistants, the behavior of the security guards. Everything that seemed trivial to others was a piece of the puzzle she silently put together. With the same patience as someone waiting for winter to pass, she remained discreet, unhurried. Time was working in her favor. One night, alone in the hallway, she stopped before the framed photo of her husband on the wall, Kang Min-ho, the man who transformed Hanoul. The reflection of the light on the glass seemed to mock her. But Ji-won only smiled slightly, the kind of smile born not of joy, but of certainty. Because she knew that everything he'd built was built on what was hers, and that every lie, sooner or later, finds its ruin. And fate, ever patient, was about to bring them face to face again, not as husband and wife, but as hunter and prey. Fate, as if following an invisible script, chose a day of great importance to reunite them. Hanoul Corporation was about to sign an international contract that would cement its dominance in the Asian market. The entire board of directors, investors, and press awaited the charismatic CEO's speech. Kang Min-ho, who took the stage with the same arrogant radiance as always. Ji-won, in her blue uniform, discreetly circulated among the tables, adjusting chairs, cleaning glasses, invisible to the eyes of those who believed that power was a shield against falling. The room reeked of expensive perfume and hypocrisy. Min-ho's words echoed through the speakers. He talked about corporate family, ethics, tradition, cruel ironies coming from a man who had betrayed them all. Ji-won watched from the side of the room, her gaze steady, almost impassive, as past and present collided silently within her. His every sentence was a reminder of the lie she lived, and each applause, a wound elegantly opened. Then the doors to the hall opened. With a roar of cameras, Seo Hye-jin, stunning in a red dress, entered alongside aides and reporters. She walked with the confidence of someone who believed she owned the world and the man who ruled it. Min-ho, surprised but captivated by the game of appearances, interrupted his speech and rushed to greet her. The room filled with flashbulbs. It was then that his eyes fell on Ji-won, kneeling, picking up a fallen napkin. Fate held his breath. To impress his lover and demonstrate control, Min-ho said with a laugh, "This is just an employee. She's only been here a short time, but she's efficient." Hyejin's laughter rang out loud, piercing more than 1,000 words. Ji-won slowly raised her gaze. For a moment, time stood still. She looked at the man she once loved and the woman he'd chosen to humiliate her, and smiled. A restrained smile, almost imperceptible, but one that carried a quiet strength. The strength of someone who knew she didn't need to shout to be heard. When the meeting ended, the hall emptied, leaving only the sound of her footsteps and the distant echo of applause. Ji-won cleared the table where the couple had toasted, and in the reflection of the glass, she saw the face that had once cried in pain, now hardened with determination. In the silence of that late afternoon, she realized that the game had begun, and this time she would play in silence, with the cards no one knew she held. And as night fell over Seoul, what seemed like just another day of humiliation would become the beginning of the fall of an empire that should never have belonged to him. That night seemed normal for those who left the company after work, but for Han Ji-won was the beginning of something much bigger. The Hanul Corporation building, now empty and silent, became a labyrinth of memories and secrets. The lights in the hallways flickered dimly, and the distant sound of wind hitting the windows created an almost symbolic atmosphere of suspense, as if the very structure of the company sensed something was about to be revealed. Ji-won walked slowly, her heart pounding between anxiety and revenge, until she stopped in front of the door that had once been her father's office. For 5 years, no one had entered. It was a forbidden room, sealed under the pretext of preserving the founder's memory. But Ji-won knew the secret, the safe behind the bookshelf. With a hairpin and an old magnetic badge she'd kept for all those years, she unlocked the lock and pushed open the door. The scent of old wood and forgotten paper filled the air. The shadows in the room seemed to come to life, projecting onto her the past that never rested. Her father's paintings were still in the same place. His smiling portrait seemed to be watching her, as if approving of what she was about to do. Ji-won ran her fingers over the table, feeling the dust of absence, until she found the safe built into the wall. With steady hands, she typed in a sequence she had never forgotten: her father's birthday. The metallic sound of the unlocking echoed like thunder in her chest. Inside, wrapped in yellowed folders, were the documents that could change everything. The original will of the Hanul Group. As he opened it, his eyes scanned each line, and confirmation came like a blade cutting through the silence. She was the sole legitimate heir to the corporation. The document naming Min-ho president was a fraud, forged with doctored digital signatures. Ji-won put her hand to her mouth, containing a mixture of emotion and anger. The weight of injustice finally took concrete form, and with it, the power to rewrite destiny was born. She took photos, scanned the pages with her phone, and hid the copies on a flash drive, hidden in her employee badge. Before leaving, she looked at her father's portrait again and murmured quietly, "They erased you from history, but I will make the world remember who really built this." The wind blew through the half-open window, making the papers flutter as if the past were saying goodbye. Ji-won walked away with slow but firm steps, feeling that the ground beneath her feet was no longer the same. Not the ground of humiliation, but the ground of renewal. And when the city lights came on outside, no one imagined that that night, hidden among forgotten papers, Hanul's destiny had been completely rewritten. With the true will in hand, Han Ji-won, she realized that the power was no longer just a memory. It was breathing again in her, and like a force that had always belonged to her. But she knew that attacking impulsively would be suicide. Kang Min-ho, he still had allies, influence, and control over appearances. and Korean society valued image more than truth. So Ji-won decided to act in the shadows, like the wind before the storm. She sought out her father's former lawyer, Senior Choi, an aging man, but still faithful to the memory of Han Tae-suk. The reunion was filled with pent-up emotion. Upon seeing Ji-won, he stood up with tears in his eyes, as if the past had come flooding back to him. "I knew one day you would come back," he said, his voice breaking. She simply placed the original will on the table. The silence that followed was more eloquent than any explanation. The truth was there, alive and undeniable. With his help and Park Yun-seo, a former board secretary and one of the few who never became corrupt, Ji-won began to draw up a detailed plan. She knew it wasn't enough to expose the fraud. She needed to dismantle Min-ho from the inside out, making his downfall inevitable, slow, and irreversible. He created a silent network of allies, employees loyal to his father's legacy, who began providing information, suspicious contracts, illicit transfers, and data that would compromise the CEO. Meanwhile, Min-ho, unaware of the enemy slumbering so close, began to feel the weight of his own ambition. Tense meetings, errors in reports, suspicious investors, the empire that had seemed unshakable was beginning to show signs of cracks. Something was wrong, and for the first time, he couldn't identify the threat. Ji-won, now disguised, moved through the corridors like a watchful shadow. Each document that passed through her hands was a thread she pulled, unraveling the web of lies Min-ho had woven. The calm in her gaze hid a hurricane of strategies. The game he thought he mastered was slowly being rewritten under her rules. On a rainy night, facing the top-floor windows, Ji-won watched the lights of Seoul reflecting off the glass and thought about how fate seemed to have human hopes. It might be late, but it never lost its way. The past pulsed again, and each beat brought the certainty that justice needed no rush, only time. And time, finally, was on her side. The next move would be the riskiest, to put Min-ho's pride in the crosshairs and make him believe the danger came from elsewhere, when in fact it was sleeping inside his own house. The following days became a stage of appearances and tension. SEO Hye-jin, accustomed to being the center of attention, began to notice something was off. Min-ho's behavior had changed. He had become more restless, impatient, and meetings ended in shouts muffled by the glass walls. News of minor administrative lapses and late reports began to circulate discreetly among investors, and the perfect image she so often displayed on social media was beginning to fade. The shine of her jewelry no longer masked the insecurity bubbling. Beneath her skin, determined to reassert her power, Hye-jin organized a lavish charity dinner, covered by the press and attended by Seoul's biggest businessmen. She wanted to show the world, and herself, that she was still the woman at the side of the city's most powerful man. The hall was lit by crystal chandeliers, violins were playing, and the couple arrived looking as perfect as ever. But among the waiters and staff at the event, a discreet figure moved silently. Han Ji-won, now as a buffet support assistant. When Hye-jin saw her, it took a few seconds to recognize that serene face. A spark of unease flashed in her eyes. With a sneer, she walked over and, loud enough for everyone to hear, commented, "It seems like the company is hiring anyone these days." Min-ho laughed nervously, trying to change the subject, but Ji-won's gaze remained fixed. During dinner, amidst the toasts and rehearsed smiles, an incident changed the mood. Hye-jin, in a theatrical gesture, spilled red wine on Ji-won's uniform and, feigning a stumble, said sarcastically, "Be careful not to stain the company floor." For a moment, silence fell over the room. Everyone waited for a reaction. Ji-won took a deep breath, looked up, and calmly replied, her voice firm and serene, cutting through the air. "Wine stains the outside, Character, the inside. The phrase, spoken without hatred, shot through the room like an arrow. The guests glanced at each other, embarrassed. Min-ho looked away, feeling the discomfort growing. Hye-jin tried to laugh, but her laughter came out shaky. The event continued, but the scene was captured on cell phones and in the gossip columns. Within hours, the phrase went viral, and the public began to wonder who the woman was who had faced the Queen of Hanul without trembling. Ji-won left the salon unhurriedly, her uniform still stained, but her dignity intact. In the reflection of the glass doors, she saw her own face, not that of the humiliated woman, but that of the justice she was awakening. And while Hye-jin worried about her image online, Ji-won prepared the movement that would unmask the empire of lies they both supported, one as an accomplice, the other as a reborn victim. The dinner incident seemed to have passed, but its aftermath echoed like invisible thunder within the walls of Hanul Corporation. Within days, videos of the confrontation between Seo Hye-jin and employee Yoon So-ra spread across social media. The public praised Ji-won's elegant response, calling her the woman with the sentence that became a lesson. The lover's reputation, once untouchable, began to crumble. Malicious comments surfaced. Investors became suspicious, and the board began to question whether Min-ho's image still represented stability. Kang Min-ho, increasingly pressured, he tried to control the damage. What had once been a glass empire now showed obvious cracks. He became suspicious of everyone, employees, advisors, even Hye-jin herself. Stress consumed him, and the fear of failure made him act erratically. At night, he stared at the ceiling of his room with his eyes open, troubled by a strange sensation, as if he were being watched, as if the past had returned to exact the price for his sins. Meanwhile, Ji-won continued her plan with the coldness of someone who knew pain. She gathered evidence, documents, and forged contracts that had sustained Min-ho's fraud for years. With the help of her secret allies, she managed to trace the origins of financial embezzlement, stock manipulation, and illegal payments made in the name of shell companies. Every piece of paper, every number, was a piece of the trap she was setting. One afternoon, as she walked through the company lobby, Ji-won overheard part of a conversation between Min-ho and Hye-jin. They were arguing loudly. "You exposed me in front of everyone," he said, his face contorted with rage. "You're the one who lost control," she retorted. The couple's perfect facade was crumbling. The press was already speculating about internal crises and power struggles, and for the first time, the man who had always controlled everything felt the bitter taste of vulnerability. That night, Min-ho called an emergency meeting with the directors. He spoke about loyalty and discipline in a shaky voice, trying to reassert his authority. Ji-won, present among the support staff, hung on every word. It was strange to see him like this, so small before an empire that seemed to swallow its own creator. In his face, she no longer saw the husband she had loved, but the enemy who had turned her into a shadow. From the top of the building, as the rain fell over Seoul, Ji-won watched the reflection of the lights in the windows and thought, "He believed he had erased me, but what is born of truth never dies." The wind blew hard, carrying away the distant sound of thunder, as if the universe was confirming that the time of waiting was over. And when the next morning arrives, Min-ho will discover that the woman he believed to be invisible was about to have the whole world looking at him and his secrets. The next morning dawned differently in Seoul. The sky, covered in dense clouds, seemed to sense that something grand was about to happen. At the top of the skyscraper Hanul Corporation, an extraordinary meeting had been called. The atmosphere in the hallways was tense, and even the security guards exchanged uncertain glances. None of them imagined that this would be the day when All the masks would fall. Han Ji-won, still disguised as Yun So-ra, walked backstage with firm steps but a racing heart. Inside the briefcase she carried lay the evidence that would destroy the empire of lies built on her father's name. It was the moment she had waited 5 long years for, the moment when the humiliated woman would become the judge of her own story. The meeting started on time. Kang Min-ho entered the room with a practiced smile, trying to hide the panic that was hiding behind his eyes. To his right, Seo Hye-jin, pale, nervous, avoided the curious glances of the directors. The press had been invited to cover the announcement of a supposed international merger, but no one could imagine the true reason for the call. As Min-ho stood to speak, the doors slowly opened. Everyone turned. Ji-won's figure emerged, now dressed in a dark suit, her hair loose, and the royal badge pinned to her chest. Han Ji-won, chairman of the board and heir of the Hanul Group. The silence that followed was almost sacred. Hye-jin let out a sigh. Min-ho paled. "This meeting," she said calmly, "will not be to celebrate a merger. It will be to reveal a truth." He placed the original will, documents and recordings, proving the fraud on the table. One by one, the directors began leafing through the papers, their faces changing color. The journalists' cameras captured everything. Min-ho tried to react, but his words came out fragmented, as if the air had left him. "This is a lie. Manipulation," he stammered. Ji-won approached slowly. "Lie?" she repeated, her tone cold and firm. "Lies were everything you built, using my father's name, my love, and my trust." Her voice didn't tremble. "Today, I take back what is mine." The hall erupted in murmurs. Hye-jin tried to back away, but security was already closing the doors. The truth was there for all to see, and in that moment, Ji-won understood that the silence she'd maintained for so many years had been worth it, because the sound of an imposter's downfall is the most fitting music fate can play. Min-ho, defeated, slumped in his chair, his gaze blank. Ji-won gathered up the papers and turned away. Justice was served, but the story wasn't over yet. Because power, when it falls, never collapses alone. And Min-ho's downfall would be just the first echo of a much greater fall. When the cameras went dark and silence filled the room, the empire of Kang Min-ho began to crumble. Not with explosions, but with the slow, cold sound of shame. The directors who had once revered him looked away, the staff whispered among themselves, and the air that had once filled him with authority now weighed on his shoulders like a sentence. The man who for years had reigned arrogantly over everyone now became a shadow of his former self, trapped between disbelief and fear. Ji-won remained motionless, watching. Her face was serene, but her eyes bore the weight of all she had endured. There was no hatred, no pleasure, only the silence. Of justice served, Min-ho staggered to his feet, reaching for the woman he had once called his wife. "Ji-won, please, you have to listen to me. I did this for us. You don't understand." She looked at him for a long time, and the smile that played across her lips was almost painfully calm. "For us?" he replied, his voice low, firm, and sharp as the sound of breaking glass. "You destroyed me to rise. You erased me to show off. And when you realized you couldn't shine without my light, you remembered I existed." The words fell like hammers on his heart. His justifications died in his throat. Ji-won approached, laying out the definitive evidence, false reports, forged signatures, secret accounts on the table. With each page, Min-ho's expression fell, and the pride that sustained him crumbled with it. He tried to touch her hand, but she drew back, firm. "You betrayed me for power, not for love. And power now returns to those who built it with truth." Min-ho fell to his knees, mumbling incoherent words. Outside, journalists awaited the man who would make headlines, not as a hero, but as an example of a downfall. As he walked down the hallway, the sound of flashbulbs mingled with the echo of his slow footsteps. It was the same hallway where Ji-won had once been expelled. Now it was he who walked out with his head bowed, enveloped in a silence that screamed his defeat. From the balcony, Ji-won watched the scene unblinkingly. The wind blew her hair, and for a moment she thought of fate as a wheel that never stops turning, sometimes slowly, sometimes cruel, but always just. However, her gaze brought no relief, only a restlessness that arose deep within her soul. Because when justice arrives, it never comes alone. It always brings questions, truths that sleep beneath the ashes. And in the shadows of that silent victory, a new movement was taking shape. The name Seo Hye-jin would echo again, and with it, a revelation capable of turning everyone's destiny upside down. It remains to be seen, Kang Min-ho chode throughout Seoul like thunder splitting the sky after a long storm. Newspapers reported his downfall, news reports aired every detail of the scandal, and social media devoured images of the once powerful CEO being escorted out of Hanul Corporation. But there was one shadow that had yet to be reached by justice. Seo Hye-jin, the woman who for years fed on the vanity and leftovers of the stolen empire. In the early days, Hye-jin tried to disappear. She spent her nights wrapped in expensive blankets, her face bare of makeup, her phone full of unanswered messages. Her old friends avoided her, the invitations stopped, and the doors to magazines and events closed as quickly as they once opened. The woman who thrived on the spotlight now faced the loneliness of the dark. But fate, merciless in its precision, is not content with half-hearted punishments. While Ji-won reorganized the company and re-established her authority, a new dossier began, circulating among journalists and prosecutors. It contained bank records, illegal transfers, and evidence that Hye-jin had been complicit in Hanul's own money laundering and embezzlement. The evidence was irrefutable. The woman who once laughed at the pain of others would now be the face of corruption. The news of her pre-trial detention hit the headlines like a bombshell. Ji-won in her office watched the scene on television without any sign of triumph. Her serene face reflected a truth time had taught her, revenge loses its flavor when fate does the work alone. Hye-jin was detained in her luxury apartment, still wearing the same red dress she had worn at the dinner where she humiliated Ji-won. As the police led her away, photographers captured every step, every tear, every desperate look. Outside, the rain was falling again, washing the streets of Seoul. Ji-won walked to the window, her gaze distant. Although there was no resentment, there was a quiet melancholy in the air. The knowledge that no victory comes without a cost. She thought about the twists and turns of fate, how time has invisible hands that put everything back in its place, sooner or later. On the news, the reporter ended the story with a sentence that sounded like bitter poetry. The empire of lies has crumbled, and the silence of the true lover now reigns over the ruins. Ji-won turned off the television and took a deep breath. Justice had been served, but deep down, something inside her still whispered that the end wasn't the end, just the beginning of a new cycle. Because even amidst the ruins of revenge, Han Ji-won's heart still beat with questions that fate insisted on leaving unanswered. And one of them, perhaps the most painful, was about to emerge from the shadows of the past. The sun of a new morning rose over Seoul, as if the sky itself wanted to erase the shadows of the past. The first rays of light filtered through the windows of Hanul Corporation, painting a golden hue where coldness, greed, and silence once stood. Han Ji-won walked the corridors with slow but steady steps, as if revisiting the scene of an ancient battle to confirm that the war had finally ended. Every corner of that building brought memories of hidden tears, of humiliations endured in silence, and of promises of revenge that over time transformed into lessons of wisdom. The carpet that once bore the luxurious shoes of those who had scorned her now bore the soft sound of her footsteps. The walls, once adorned with paintings celebrating power and profit, now displayed team photographs, ordinary, genuine faces of people seen again. Ji-won stopped in front of the main meeting room, the same place where she had been expelled, under the indifferent gaze of directors who had once sworn loyalty to her father. For a moment, she closed her eyes and took a deep breath, feeling the weight of memory dissolve into the air. The past no longer hurt her. It was simply part of the path that had shaped her. The board of directors had been completely revamped. Those who had used power to oppress were now gone, replaced by simple, competent, and fair people. In the corridors, the atmosphere was different. Fear had given way to trust, and even the silence seemed lighter. Ji-won no longer sought the throne that had been stolen from her. There was no longer any need to prove herself. Now, her mission was to rebuild, not to dominate. Hanul's new headquarters weren't marked by luxury, but by harmony. The old corporate motto, "Power belongs to those who win," had been removed and replaced with a phrase she had written herself, inspired by something her father had heard as a child. "Power is not dominating, it is serving." These words echoed like a silent prayer among the employees, a daily reminder that true strength lies in lifting others up, not stepping on them. In the main hall, the portrait of Han Tae-suk, his father, had once again taken pride of place. Beneath the painting, a gold plaque bore a simple but profound dedication: "For those who taught me that the true legacy is dignity." Seeing his name there again, Ji-won felt her chest warm. For so many years, her father's name had been erased from the company's history, as if the man who built it all had been nothing more than a ghost. Now, time was returning what was his, and along with it, what was hers. Her new office lacked the luxury of the past. It was spacious, bright, with understated furnishings and huge windows that let in the breeze. From above, she watched Seoul awaken amid chaotic traffic and hurried voices. It was like watching the city's heartbeat in sync with her own. The phone rang non-stop. Newspapers wanted interviews, magazines requested exclusives, TV channels begged for statements. But Ji-won refused them all. She understood that true greatness lies in the silence that speaks for itself. Her victory needed no headlines. It was written in the changes she inspired, in the transformed lives around her, in the faces that now smiled freely. On her desk, a single leather folder held a secret, an old letter yellowed with age. It was the letter she had written to her father back when she was pretending to be her own company's cleaning lady. Trembling, she opened the letter and quietly reread each line. "Father, what was mine has returned. But what I have learned is worth more than any empire. The power born of pain needs no throne. The respect that rises in the eyes of those who survived is enough." The tears fell slowly, lightly, not of sadness, but of liberation. They were the tears of someone who finally understood that true justice is not imposed by force, but blossoms in its own time, like the dawn after a long night. In the afternoon, Ji-won went down to the main lobby. The employees were finishing their shifts, laughing, exchanging stories, making plans. They were the same people who had once walked with their heads bowed, trapped in fear of a system that crushed them. Now, their eyes were alive. She observed each face, recognizing in each a reflection of her own journey, the fall, the pain, the rebirth. A young man approached and greeted her shyly. "Ms. Han, thank you for giving us back the pride of working here." She smiled tenderly, touched his shoulder and replied, "I didn't give anything back. What's true always finds its way back." Outside, The wind blew hard, ruffling her hair as she stared up at the company's gleaming sign. The gold letters looked new, but the glow they emanated came from within her, from the woman who had once been invisible, but now guided a legion of people by example, not by voice. Ji-won took a deep breath, feeling the light air of freedom she had finally achieved. Before leaving, she walked to the main entrance and studied her reflection in the glass doors. For a second, she saw there not only the woman she had become, but also the naive young woman who believed in promises, the humiliated employee who silently mopped the floor, and the heiress who lost everything to find herself again. They all coexisted within her, united, strong, whole. He closed his eyes and heard, like a distant whisper, his father's voice echoing in his memory. "Now, my daughter, you have become who you always were." A serene smile appeared on her lips. With firm steps, she walked away from the building and into the fading light, leaving behind not the empire, but the pain that had once sustained it. As the wind danced between the buildings and the sun set on the horizon, Ji-won understood the deepest truth of her journey. Destiny is not a straight line. It is a wheel that turns until everything falls into place. Before he walked away completely, he took one last look at the Hanol Corporation logo and murmured, his voice firm and his heart at peace, "The empire fell, but the legacy was born." And then he left, leaving behind him the silent mark of a woman reborn from her own ashes. If this story touched you, remember, time may take. It's time, but it never fails. It always brings back the truth, rewards those who remain steadfast, and teaches that every fall, when faced with dignity, is just the prelude to a new ascent. Subscribe to the channel now and continue following stories where fate takes its toll, love is reborn, and justice finds those who never stop believing.